Great. Okay, so that's a real relief and lovely to see you, Sharon, there. So just to briefly introduce, as I did with Jennifer, so in terms of Sharon's role, why we're so delighted to have you here, Sharon. Sharon's project leader for Barnardo's for the Family Support Services based in Ballyogan and Bray. So Sharon, just thanks so much for sharing with you your perspective and what the work that you've been doing, following on from what Jennifer just shared. So over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Ali, and hopefully my technology will behave itself today. So I just want to firstly start by saying thank you very much, I suppose, to the Dún Laoghaire Rathdown and the Bray Task Force in having this, I suppose, inviting me to speak here today, and also thank Alcohol Action Ireland as well for the presentation, and just say very well done to Jennifer as well. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about what is hidden harm. I'm going to look at and talk about how Barnardo's started our hidden harm journey and how we have evolved within that. I'm going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 and hidden harm on the families we work with. I'm going to give a little snapshot of a day in the life of a young boy experiencing hidden harm, just to give a flavour, I suppose, and get us thinking about the families that where this could be happening. And I'm going to talk a little bit around the complexities of interagency work and hidden harm.
Sharon, just to say, you might want to go into slideshow just for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, we'll do now.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Ali. So what is hidden harm? So just to recap for us all, the HSE states it is the experience of children living with and affected by parental substance misuse has become known as hidden harm because these children are often unknown to services. Not all parents who misuse substances experience difficulties with parenting capacity. Equally, not all children exposed to parental substance misuse are affected adversely either in the short term or the long term. However, most children exposed to parental substance misuse do need some form of support. And the Hidden Harm Practice Guide and Strategic Statement are available on the HSE and TUSLA website. So I'm going to talk about how we started our hidden harm journey. So for over 20 years, Barnardo's has operated a family support service in Dún Laoghaire area. And this has evolved into two other sites. So there's one in Samuel Beckett building, where I am today in Ballyogan, and our most recent one in Bray, which we have a dedicated full-time worker since last year. And essentially what we do is we support children and families where parental substance misuse has an impact on the child's development and welfare. So the Minister did speak in his opening speech around the initiative and collaboration between the drug task forces. And I wanted to highlight that as well today. And just to point out that it was a really, really good piece of collaborative work between the Dún Laoghaire Rathdown Drugs Task Force and the Bray Drugs Task Force in conjunction with TUSLA and HSE. And within that, we were able to secure funding under the Strand 2 initiative. And what that has enabled us to do is to bring to the fore our objective around implementing the hidden harm strategy. And we do focus on working with families experiencing addiction. And that has enabled us to have a dedicated full-time post in the Bray area. So for ourselves, the concept of hidden harm has a framework right now, but it's not a new concept. And I'm going to explain why I say that. So over 20 years ago, Dr. Quinn from the HSE Addiction Clinic in Dún Laoghaire approached Barnardo's in relation to working together as a response to recognising the needs of parents the needs of the children whose parents misuse substances. And it wasn't named as hidden harm, but it essentially was that. So we took responsibility to operate childcare and family support services for children whose parents attended the Methadone Clinic in Patrick Street. And this has developed into our family support and preschool service in Dún Laoghaire. Service users were asked, are they parents, and did they wish to avail of support? And it was quite innovative at the time as a service because we had Barnardo staff located on site in a children's room, providing childcare while the parent attended for treatment. And thus developed a working together agreement, which has lasted to this day, where service users consented to appropriate information being shared between the HSE and Barnardo's. So what do we do? Well, how we work is we establish and maintain safety, we strengthen parental capacity, we explore, and Jennifer spoke about this and what we do in our work around getting the parents to understand the impact of substance misuse in their child. We work at improving parent-child relationships, and we explore the whole impact of emotional loss when it comes to substance misuse within families. So how do we do this? Well, we offer a range of core services, and they can range from assessment through to individual work with parents, individual work with children, parent and child work, a lot of practical family support, crisis intervention. We have a very active case management at the core of this. We have a trauma-informed way of working, and we also have a lot of interagency work as well. So what we do is we have really open and honest conversations with parents about their drug use and the risk. We explore existing safety and as well, what we do is we increase the child's visibility in the community. So the more people that can see them, the more eyes that are on them, the less chance that they experience hidden harm and nothing is done about it. So we also report concerns to SLA where necessary. And we also work on parents in strengthening their parenting capacity and exploring and planning for the children's needs in that. We would work with the children to give them a space to talk about what has happened and how they are experiencing their lives. And we will do group work as well, or individual sessions. So the impact of hidden harm on COVID-19. So what have we seen? Jennifer did speak in her presentation around the increase in alcohol sales. And we know that alcohol sales, now that should say it increased by 44 million. Domestic violence calls are up over 80% on last year. And we know that most of this drinking is done in the home. And when that has happened, it can have potentially harmful impact on the children. We know that home visits stopped for a lot of services, and we had to, I suppose, really respond to a new way of working with families. And what we have seen is, I suppose, within our projects in Dunleary, Ballyogan and Bray, we have noted that there was 186 families received a service in 2020, and was 147 in 2019. And we've seen a lot of increase in crisis management sessions. So the sessions offered were increased by 85%. And those attended by service users were up by 117%. And welfare notifications to SLA increased by 70%. And so we have seen as well an increase in referrals for children around the 9, 10 and 11 years old with anxiety. So there's increase in anxiety, there's increased social anxiety. So some children and teenagers are not leaving their bedrooms, they're not leaving their house. There is an increased sense of social isolation, they're withdrawn from their peer group, they're withdrawn from their family as well. And this does impact on mental health. We have seen an increased impact on parental mental health also. And I suppose when going back to the children and teenagers, when they are staying in their rooms, they're not attending school, so they are falling behind in school as well. And we find as well there has been an increased sense of isolation for some families. So when we work with families where there is substance misuse issues, like we do find that there is very conflictual or ruptured relationships within that family. So they may not always have that support network available to them. And very often the project worker from a drug service or family support service, maybe the only source of support they have. And that was reduced to phone and video calls or doorstep visits. So that was increasingly difficult for families. The crisis management, like we have seen from, like that can be anywhere from incidences of DV that we have to respond to and support and engage in safety planning, to challenges to mental well-being, maybe a parent withdrawals from mental health service. We can have, there's financial impact as well. So we do know that maybe a lot of the families that we work with, that maybe they lost their jobs during COVID. So then there was extra pressure and stress and demands on parents. Money coming into the house was less. Some of our families found it difficult to manage the 2-week social welfare payment. There was the pressure of homeschooling. Parental and child anxiety has increased. And as Jennifer touched on earlier, a lot of the safety mechanisms that were in place for children were not available. Schools closed down, sporting activities and after school clubs. So children became even less visible in the community to services. And thankfully, we are starting to reopen. I'm going to move on to introducing you to a young boy. And what I want to do is I want to get you thinking about a child and how they might experience hidden harm. And I suppose seeing it from his perspective and what he's thinking and what is his lived experience. So Danny is 10 years old and he lives with his mum. So currently there are no services engaged with Danny and his mum. Mum went to the doctor before Christmas. She was saying, oh God, you know, I just feel a bit low because, you know, it's COVID, my anxiety is through the roof. I'm finding it really difficult with homeschooling. I just feel under pressure as a parent. And that's really all she said. But we know behind the scenes that Danny's mum has increased in her drinking and it's got progressively worse. So we're going to see how that has impacted on Danny. So Danny's first thought in the morning is, who's going to be at home? Who's going to be at home when I come home today? So there was a time that Danny remembers that when he came home, it was his mum and they were able to spend time together. But since COVID, it could be mum's partner, it could be different friends. So he's never quite sure who's at home in the afternoons. So this is Danny. He's very cool and trendy, 10-year-old boy, but he is currently at the bus stop and it's about 20 minutes since he jumped out of bed. It's Tuesday morning, it's freezing cold out there and it's a lashing rain here in Ballyogan and he's at the bus stop. And we just noticed straight away he's got no coat on. So Danny's thinking, God, I had to wake myself again this morning. Mum just didn't manage to get up. Mum was drinking last night. So Danny had to get himself up and get himself dressed and go to school. He's also thinking, God, there's no food for breakfast. Usually, do you know what? He does remember a time going back to maybe before things got too much for Mum, when there'd always be a cereal bar that he could nab on his way out the door. And he's just starting to think like it's becoming increasingly more often now when there's actually, maybe it's a Monday or Tuesday and there's no food in the house, where before it might have been a Friday morning. He's thinking he needs a new coat that fits. So Danny outgrew his coat just before Easter, and they were back to school after the Easter holidays. But he just, you know what, he knows if he goes to approach Mum these days that he's not going to get a good response. And he's very aware that there's, you know, Mum is saying there's not much money in the house at the moment. So that is impacting on him. He's also, and Jennifer said, like, kids do know what's happening within the families. He's worried about Mum and her drinking. So he has noticed that the drinking has increased, and he can see, like, what's that doing to Mum. And so he's noticing that she's not up in the mornings when he comes home from school. Will she be in bed? Will she be on the couch? And he's thinking he's going to be late for school now. And Danny knows that when he's late for school, he's got an English teacher, and she's always asking him, are you okay? And she's going to notice this morning. And Danny's thinking, I'm not really. But Danny just doesn't feel that he can say, actually, things are not okay at home and Mum is drinking. Because Mum doesn't really talk about her drinking. There is a sense of secrecy around that. He's thinking, I wish I had money for lunch. He did pop his head into Mum this morning, but she just didn't look too good. So he just didn't risk asking for money. He is saying that also he is worried about that he heard the rows last night and he's tired. And he's just really worried about all of this. So Danny goes into school and his English teacher does notice that he's very quiet. And she says, Danny, is everything okay? And Danny goes, I am, it's grand. I just couldn't sleep last night. And I said, part of him really wants to say what's going on, but he just can't. But the English teacher starts thinking, and she's thinking, do you know what? I've seen maybe a deterioration in this family functioning, particularly over the last 6 months. And she's beginning to see little patterns. So she's thinking to herself, this time last year, like Danny was, for the most part, he was on time. You know, he had a coat, he had money for school lunches. And now she's noticed that mainly since January, that things just aren't like that. So she's noticing that, you know, he's late a few mornings a week. She did ring Mum before Christmas and Mum was like, look, I'm okay. Do you know what? It's COVID. Everybody's affected by it. But she's starting to think, is there something more going on with this family than what they're telling me? So Danny goes to school. Now, excuse my animation here. So there he is. He's on his little way home from school. And I suppose he's thinking, who can I talk to and who can help Mum? And really the point here is that there are services that Danny and Mum can link in with. So we see that there's youth clubs which would make Danny more visible within the community. There's the adult drug treatment services, family support services. Mum has linked in with the GP, but she didn't tell him the extent to what she was drinking. And there's mental health services. And for Danny, the family does need that support. So Danny goes home and it's bedtime. So we're at the very end of Danny's day and Danny has to put himself to bed. So Mum did get up. There we have Danny again. So Mum got up, she stripped the beds. There's no curtains. Do you know what? She was meant to get curtains when they moved in and she just hasn't got around to it. And she didn't have the energy to make the bed again. So Danny's 10 and he's put himself to bed. Again, there's no nighttime stories, there's no cuddles. And again, Danny can remember a time when there was bedtime stories, when there was hugs, when there was cuddles. So Mum is feeling very poorly. She's on the couch, it's very dark. Danny came home, the room was really dark. He's very conscious of the empty bottles lying around. You know, he feels he can't invite his friends home. And what Danny's thinking about is just wants a hug from his mum. So essentially what Danny is thinking about is that parent-child relationship. And I suppose Mum being enabled and supported in her parental capacity around that. And while Danny is not thinking this, I'm going to put words and thoughts into his head. And that is around that there's lots of excellent services out there who provide amazing supports for families. And it's to build on that and to build on having information pathways between these services so that we can bring children to the fore experiencing hidden harm. And this is going to move me on now to talking about the complexities of interagency work. So when we think about interagency work, you might imagine that it's quite straightforward, and it's not. And I suppose any services out there working with service users where there is substance misuse knows that the complexity of the addiction cycle. So, you know, a parent or service user might present and they're in recovery one week and they just might slip back into relapse. And depending on where they're at, the capacity to engage can be just at different levels. And there can be a lot of secrecy as well around addiction. So I found in the course of my work within Barnardo's, very often parents or service users who are in methadone treatment speak very openly about that. But when it comes to other substances misuse, maybe drinking, it's more hidden. And also for services, it is a very crisis-driven way of working. So you might have a session set up where you're planning to do a really reflective piece of parenting. And like, for example, Danny's mum comes in, so she's engaged in the service and her partner was around last night and there was an incident and there was a DV incident. So now you're responding to that crisis and you get pulled into that. Also, services have different viewpoints and perspectives, and that's perfectly okay. I've been involved in a lot of conversations that the task force have organised recently about bringing so the adult and drug services together with the child and family support services. And I suppose what we do need to find is that common language and building those information pathways between our services, again, to bring hidden harm in children to the fore. And I suppose it's like there are frameworks in place that work really well. So we use MEHLS, it's a really good framework, it works really well. Your family welfare conferences, child protection conferences, but it's just something, I suppose, an added layer to that. And also to the need for the national implementation formally of the hidden harm guidelines. The complexity around the struggles of substance misuse being masked by the struggles of COVID-19. So we know Danny's mum went to the doctor and she was saying, oh, do you know what, it's COVID-19, everybody's feeling this way. And that's a difficulty as well. And I suppose when project workers and we go out and we do our doorstep visits and our doorstep visits to families, like it is easy, I suppose, for families to give a sense that everything is okay when the door is only half open and like we're all struggling, the whole world is struggling. So that's masked. Also, what's come up recently as well, I've been part of conversations around services fear what they don't know. And we all fear change and how will it impact us? So services are thinking about, well, how will this change my relationship with my service user? Will it impact on the trust? Like we've worked for a very long time, we have a culture, do we need to change that? Will additional demands be put on services? Because, you know, a lot of services resources are limited. And then just around understanding of social work thresholds. And I suppose what does it mean to manage risk and to be left, I suppose, holding risk with families where appropriate. Also to understand really what services are available to families. And I think there is maybe concerns around reporting child protection and welfare issues. Now, I've had to do this throughout my career. And I would say it goes back to that relationship that you have with the service user and being very open. So it is saying, look, we are mandated, we have really good relationship with TUSA, and if we have concerns, we will report that. But it's always sitting down with the parent, unless there's an immediate risk to the safety of the child, and having that open conversation. And they're very difficult conversations, but ultimately the parents do come back and they do engage with us, because as much as those services want to bring hidden harm in children to the fore, parents want to work together for their children and they want the best for their children. And I found that. So I suppose what next? And I suppose to reiterate that it's really great to see like so many different services here today. And I suppose the different layers within those services as well, from TUSA, HSC, youth services, child and family, addiction. And I suppose for me, it's reflective of the commitment and the motivation to build on continuing to bring children experience hidden harm to the fore of our work. So that is the end of my presentation. So I just want to thank everyone for listening, and I'm going to pass you back to Ali.
Great, thank you so much, Sharon. And wow, thank you for not only sharing what's been happening, but also just bringing us into Danny's world, which I think is what we really most want to connect to and to help.